Chelsey and Tyler, thank you so much for jumping on here with me. I'm super excited to talk to you both about security, cybersecurity, information security, IT security, whatever you like to call it. I am excited to hear both of your, ideas about what's important, how this has changed from the past, how it impacts both of your roles differently in the organization, and then what you see for the future. But before we jump into that, I'd love to hear just a little bit about each of you so you can intro yourselves and why maybe we picked you to kind of talk about this topic. So Chelsey, can you go first?
Sure, thanks, Lee. I'm Chelsey Bode. I'm the president of Pearson-Kelly, and I've been doing this since 2007, so a lot has changed in the world of technology. Kind of makes you crazy, but it also keeps this place exciting.
Cool. Awesome. Tyler, how about you?
Yeah, so I am Tyler Stilley. I am the virtual Chief Information Security Officer for Pearson-Kelly. I've had an extensive background in security and IT for about the last 10 or 11 years in healthcare. And now I've came over to Pearson-Kelly in the last year and looking to kind of create some security offerings and help other businesses improve their security.
Awesome. Well, guys, so whenever we talk about security, I think one of the things that's hard to, especially for somebody even like myself, to grasp is like, what are all the things that kind of go into this? When we talk about information security, like, is door access part of that conversation? Is surveillance part of that conversation? There's some obvious things, I think, but I'd love to hear kind of both of your perspectives of how, and where we're going to play this role a little bit is maybe you both know the answers, but I'd love for you, Chelsey, as just an owner, what you expect the IT persona to kind of own for you when it comes to security inside your organization, right? And so I'd love to start with you, and then Tyler, you can correct anything that you want to or whatever. No, I would love to hear from a person who kind of recognizes the difference in different IT roles, kind of how that might play out differently. But Chelsey, from you, just from a business owner, what do you expect IT to really be responsible for when it comes to security?
Sure. So I think security itself is its own container. And I think a lot of times companies look at it as they have an IT guy or an IT team that's responsible for security that doesn't necessarily have that skill set. And so for me, it's a different practice. It's a different container and responsibility to keep the place safe. And I think physical security does play into that. I also think that the responsibility needs to be pointing out those vulnerabilities or gaps. We are working with lots of small businesses that need these offerings. And so first and foremost, it's very important that we have our own house dialed in and that we're attacking and making sure that we're very secure before we go out and start instructing other people where their failures maybe have been in the past.
Good. Yeah. Tyler, how about you? So whenever it comes to security, what do you feel like is appropriate to fall on the IT side of the house?
Sure. So, a lot of times we use IT as kind of the same bucket, right? Like technology and security kind of go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
But in the perfect world, you kind of don't want that scenario. You want to have security be separated if you can, so that you get true accountability, even for your technical team. So when you're looking at the guys who are taking the help desk calls and doing that, those don't need to be the security guys. You need to have a security guy who can kind of watch over that and keep everything in balance and in check. When we talk about that, so that you don't kind of get, for lack of better terms, nose blind to your own work, right? Where you're like, oh, I know that's over there. I'll get to it eventually. You have that security piece to kind of be the accountability portion to help drive that process and kind of keep you honest, even in technology and for the business as a whole. Which is why it's great to use a third party to help augment that, so they can kind of come in and be that expert opinion to help even your own internal technology team make sure that they're kind of being held accountable and bringing forth those new security concepts and ideas to help them kind of get up to speed.
I love that, Tyler, because it's the same check and balance that companies have in place in their admin teams. You don't have the same person receiving checks also paying your vendors. It's a really bad practice. I look at it the same way in IT.
And it's hard to do though, right? Like for a small company, you can't split every role because it just doesn't make financial sense in terms of salary. So that's where managed services can kind of come in, but being able to augment that, because you're not going to have a full team of completely separated individuals, but you're always going to kind of start with that kind of one IT guy that kind of does everything. And then as you grow and scale and your business gets larger, you'll realize that that you have to kind of branch those out. But
can organizations survive today? You kind of jumped the gun on me. I love that. Great. But can an organization survive today, 30, 40 person organization with one guy running the network and also being the security person? Like, is that a legit thing? And can they keep the company safe? Chelsey, what are your thoughts?
So I think the scary thing for me is I don't know that answer.
Yeah.
I would assume no, but a lot of what has been a struggle with IT best practices is I don't know what questions to ask or even to have the right discernment if I'm getting good information back.
Yep.
And sometimes it's not coming to me in layman terms that makes sense to me. So I don't know.
Before I pass this back to Tyler, I think that's a really valid thought process to a lot of people. So how would you go about trying to find out? Like, as a person, you don't have a Tyler. I like playing this game. You don't have a Tyler. And Pearson-Kelly, we're between 40 and 50 employees at this point. So we're one of those people that could be in one of those spots if we didn't have people like him on staff that were also supporting our customers. How would you go about that? What would you give someone as advice who maybe only has one IT guy that's needing that? Where should they go look? How would they go about that process?
Sure. I think that's where augmentation really does come into play. I think back to a controller that we had, and there were some transitions and her moving away. And so instead of, hiring very quickly, potentially the wrong person just based on a skill set that also I'm not an expert in, we found a CPA firm that outsourced and augmented our admin team for just CFO vision and accountability and doing all of our checks and balances and things like that for a season. And then we were able to go ahead and bring that in-house and kind of transition some of that over to what we use from our CPA to augment those best practices. So I think that's always king. Like, it's always good to have Big Brother, whether it's a check and balance, whether it's an augmentation of your team, because they're going to be a different authority, a different set of eyes to make us more sound. In terms of going about looking at that, I love my peer groups. I love talking to others in the industry that have experienced things, experienced failures, successes, kind of understanding what that looks like. And so I think sometimes if you have people in the business community or local community that you respect how they run their operations, seeing what they've done, seeing who they've used to augment their team would probably be the next step I would use.
That's great. And Tyler, back to you. So whenever we talk about this IT guy that's kind of unfortunately, all on his own or her own, and they're trying to take care of this network all by themselves, are there even certain portions of the network that that are heavily involved in security that they can maybe manage it, but there's pieces that they just can't? Or holistically, is it just impossible for someone to be able to do that and do it well?
And it's not impossible to do it, but you kind of hit the nail on the head there. It's much harder to do it and do it well. So it really depends on the business and the industry, right? If you're someone who's maybe like healthcare or you're in a regulated environment, it's going to be very challenging for one person to be able to do that because you have requirements that you now have to meet. For other industries that are less regulated, it's still important. Security is still the forefront of what you need to protect, but you have less demand in terms of compliance to what you have to kind of work for. So that person can kind of take a step back and not have to be as invested. But really, it kind of comes down to, in the smaller organizations, budget becomes a bigger issue, right? Because if you have current technology and you have great tool sets and everything, then one person can be much more efficient with their time whenever they're managing a network. But if you don't have hardly any tools and you're doing everything manually, then the time investment is where you offset the tool investment, and then it becomes very, very difficult for one person to even get remotely close to doing that well. So if you have a small team, you have to invest in great tools and good hardware to make that day-to-day kind of transition and day-to-day activity for that person, less intensive, if you will. But it's still very hard because security is a challenged skill set, right? I mean, like you have to stay on top of it. It takes a lot of investment to stay current with it. And if you're taking help desk calls from everyone and you're supporting printers and you're doing everything, you're doing all the basic help desk work, trying to be a network guy and then trying to be a security guy, you can master all those things, but you still only have so many hours in a day. So how long can you do that and operate that way? Like, and most of the time, those people are just they're running full tilt. They don't have time. They have to cut corners to make things work reliably and get it done because they're on to the next task. And you don't get quality work that way. But it's just it's the unfortunate kind of scenario in those situations. You just have to kind of you're playing the reaction game, right? Not the proactive game. But
Yeah.
That
That's
just
good.
made me think of another fear. So I have a friend that has invested in all the recommended tools, okay, with a smaller staff to address some of those things that you mentioned, Tyler. But then they found out, because they don't understand this world, that the tools weren't configured properly, or their team's only using 10% of the tool. And so they've invested all of this money in thinking they're doing the right things, giving their team the tools to do the right things, but then it's a huge waste. So how do you check that, from my perspective, to make sure that you're not just throwing your money down the drain and thinking that you're safer than what you actually are?
yeah, so I mean that comes back to a trust piece, and this is one of the big things that I talk about between IT leaders or any IT staff and their executive team. The executive team at organizations and leadership team, they're not going to be technical people. They're going to bring in a technical person, and there have to be a big trust component there. They have to be transparent. The IT person who's leading that group or is in charge of the group, or maybe it's the sole guy, has to feel comfortable enough to be transparent to say, hey, look, this is outside of my comfort zone. We need to hire someone. Hey, this tool is too complex. I can't configure it. Because if they don't feel comfortable, they're going to say, I can take care of it. And then they're not going to be able to. And then it is going to be set up for failure. So that communication is the big component there. So they tell you, hey, this tool is great. I don't have the capability to configure it, but the vendor will do it for us. It just is going to cost us some professional services money to be able to do it. And most vendors, almost all of them, will do that because they, of course, are in the business of making money as well. So they will help you get it set up and train your staff. And that's a very labor intensive process for them. So it usually comes at a charge, but they'll do that and then help set you up for success. But that comes back to, you're not going to know that as a leader unless the IT person says, hey, this is where we need to go. They have to have that comfortability and trust, because no one, it takes a different personality to say, hey, this is just above me. But it's not in our common nature to want to admit fault or failure, or something that we perceive as a shortcoming. But
Do you think sometimes leadership makes IT, like, not intentionally, but makes the IT person that's trying to cover up maybe their inabilities? Do you think they put them in that position? Do you think we're not as vulnerable as we can always be?
So the leadership piece comes down to, a lot of times they just want it to be fixed, right? They just want it to be done. But the big challenge is IT is an ever evolving industry, security as well. Like things change. So the big thing is you say, hey, we need to buy these tools, right? And then you find out maybe midway through the process, after you've given your leadership team the pricing, man, we need to pay professional services. I can't configure this. Then you go back to your leadership team and say, we need to buy these additional services, and it's going to cost this much. And they go, well, that's not what you told me. That's way more expensive. Well, then it's now they're like, okay, so the next time that opportunity comes up, they're not even going to ask, right? Because now it's, you push back on me on the financial side, like they're not going to go for that. I'm just going to have to kind of wing it. And then that relationship erodes from that perspective, because the leadership team doesn't really understand, like, why does it cost more? Like, what, I thought you said you could do it. Like, I thought you're an IT guy. Oh, it's the IT product, IT guy. What's, 1 + 1 is 2 here, right? That's the tricky part, because the intricacies of technology and security are kind of difficult to grasp for someone who's outside of it. Sometimes it just looks like we're always asking for more money, because we're usually always asking for more money, right? So we get a little bit of scrutiny, but you just have to have the comfortability in that relationship and the ability to take what is a very complex topic and break it down into more simplistic, digestible pieces to say, look, this is what it does, this is why we need it, and this is why I can't do it. Translate that to, business operational objectives, rather than it's super advanced, you're never going to understand it, but you just need to pay for it, because no one's going to buy into that, right? That doesn't, that doesn't make you comfortable. You're like, well, then I don't really know. I don't feel comfortable spending a lot of money on it. I don't know what I'm buying. but not every IT person is great at articulating that because it can be hard to kind of bridge the gap. But and that's, again, kind of coming back to our role, that's where we help augment in a lot of cases, being able to bridge the gap between sometimes technical staff and leadership to say, like, here's the goal, here's what you're trying to get, here's kind of that roadmap, here's what where it plays into your business, because that skill set, they could be a great engineer, but that doesn't mean they're a great communicator always, right? I mean, that doesn't mean they're a CIO or someone of that nature. They're a fantastic tech, but like they didn't go to put budget proposals together and things like that, right? They're here to get in the weeds and open stuff up and work on it.
So Chelsey, how do you prioritize security as an owner? Like, how do you know how to do that? How do you go about that for you?
First off, I hire the right people. Tyler.
Yeah, that's good. That's hiring the right people.
Yeah, I mean, when we got into wanting to take and augment small to medium-sized businesses in the space of IT services, I think it was really important for us to understand. It's like going to the gym with a personal trainer, and the person's 500 pounds. You're probably not going to be super motivated to continue to go to the gym. And so for me, I was like, we've got to figure out how to understand where those gaps are, hire the right people so that they can sit there and have some of those soft skills like communication, to speak my language and to say, here's where we're going to start, here's where we're going to prioritize. And frankly, everything was a priority to us that we didn't even know about. We didn't know anything until some of these conversations started taking place internally. But Tyler's really built that trust for us in the term or in the line of security best practices, exposing some things that we need to communicate better, maybe to insurance providers, to make sure that we're covered where we thought that, we have the right coverage. But maybe we're not able to articulate that back to our insurance provider. And so some of those things have been eye-opening for me personally.
What would you say to a guy or gal that's maybe listening to this, that's an IT director, that's trying to build? I mean, I agree. The trust is obviously the key foundation, because without that, they're not gonna believe or listen to the professional. Or it'll have to be, as you said, reactive. It'll be too late. Something bad has happened now. So what would you suggest to an IT director, or anyone sitting in that type of seat that's trying to build that with the ownership? What works for ownership? Like, is it different than it is any normal human being? Does it depend on the owner? Chelsey?
Me? Okay.
Yeah.
I think it does depend on the owner. I mean,
Yeah.
you have to be vulnerable and open-minded, and I have to ask the questions that are going to give me the answers that I need. I'm responsible for that to feel good about whatever decision I'm needing to make in terms of budget. But it's the same way for marketing. It's the same way for IT. It's the same way for administrative conversations that we have. I mean, I think if I'm an IT director and I'm trying to talk me into spending money on a security tool, I want to see analytics first. That tells part of the story. Why is this the priority for us to spend money on right now? Where does it fit into the overall long game? Are you going to come to me next month and there's going to be another priority? Are there 10 priorities? What does the future look like in these conversations to the best of your ability? And then why is this the first one that we need to attack? What are some of the back-end analytics that help me understand that maybe that spend is investing in what we have to do. It's not actually costing us money. It's a non-negotiable, needs to happen, but I need to be sold and feel like we know those answers before. And then it's very easy to say yes. And so Tyler's done a very good job of giving that communication in my own language, and I think to our leadership team language, whenever we've had these conversations where we weren't budgeting or anticipating spending money in certain categories, it makes sense and it's easy to say yes, and we have a mutual plan in place of how to attack those.
How do you go about prioritizing that, Tyler? I mean, it's the risk is so high for so many of the things when we talk about security, especially in today's world where there are so many ways that you can get yourself in trouble.
Sure.
How do you go about prioritizing that? How do you figure out? I mean, because again, the risk is high in a lot of areas.
It's
Where do
tough.
you start too?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's tough because I mean, as security, our nature is like we find all the things that are wrong, and then we're like, all this needs to be fixed, like yesterday, and they're like, cool, we don't have money for that. That's crazy. You're like, well, but like which one do you want to do first? And you're like, all of it. Like we need to do all of it. Like it's not optional, right? So that becomes a challenge because now we have to pick and choose. Like it all needs to be fixed, right? So the biggest way in kind of what I would take from healthcare and kind of the security aspect in general is that you look to do either like a risk assessment or a security assessment, right? So you would look at the business and say, how do we make money? What's our operational drive? What is our applications and things that have the biggest impact to our business? And then look at the security risks you've identified and see which of those security risks has the greatest risk to what brings in your money, right? And there's going to be a lot that align. There may be some that are all number ones that are up there, and you just got to kind of pick the one that you think is the worst, or the one that needs to be addressed, sooner rather than later. But you can usually start to once you look across the board and you identify, the big buckets of applications or processes. Like, hey, if this goes down, we're going to lose money every day. All right, so that's a priority. That's a priority server. That's a priority application. What's the security risks on that server? So let's start there. Or what's the security risks that impact that product? Because if that worst case scenario happens, we directly start losing money, right? Like that's a huge issue. Not having someone's computer encrypted is a security risk, but what's the impact of that if something happens to it versus someone breaching your network and getting into that server we talked about, right? So that's where you do that assessment. And then from there, you can begin to kind of classify based upon the risk and the likelihood that it is going to happen, how probable or kind of what the priority is when you go to present. So using some tools like that, which can be a bit of a challenge. Assessments are always kind of tricky, but that helps you start to identify what is the high risk items, and you can start to kind of put them in buckets. And that's not to say that you're going to get them all neatly organized. You're still going to have some that are all still high risk items, right? And maybe you say, well, these are the top three. Here's kind of the prices. Which can we financially do? We need to do them all because they're high risk items, but I understand dollars are not always available for it at the same time. So let's see what each remediation costs. And as you're looking at the remediation to say, hey, it's going to cost us $25,000 to fix this issue. If they were to hit our network and we were to lose money, how long would it take us to recover that server? All right, let's say it takes 2 days, we lose $5,000. All right, well, the cost to remediate it is 25 grand. So that's a pretty heavy delta. But maybe there's another high risk item that costs us $200 to fix. Well, that makes a lot more sense, right? So you start to leverage those two. You still need to fix the other one, but if they're all in the same risk category, then you start looking at kind of the cost of remediation versus the impact to determine kind of your next steps. So it's not we're never going to do it. You can always choose to accept it and say, hey, it's just too expensive to fix. We're just going to accept that risk. And that is a valid option. Drives people like me crazy, but it is a valid option once we've kind of done that because the risk is too high. Usually in that situation, we say, well, can we not change the way we do business? Can we not change how we use this product to lessen the risk? Maybe we don't have to pay for the security solution that fixes this, but let's change how we approach it to reduce the likelihood or the risk exposure. But that's how you would approach it. That takes a lot of time to kind of go through, but that's what you're looking at is you're trying to justify, because when you say that like all of this is on fire, right? Like all these things are broken and they're all on fire. They're like, well, then it's all messed up. Like it's just all broken. So like we don't have the money to fix it. It's been broken for 5 years. So like, we'll just keep on doing it, right? Like that doesn't really speak to a leadership team. You have to translate it to say, here's the impact, here's the likelihood that it's going to happen, and here's how it could cost us money. This is why we need to spend it, because that will tell them what they need to hear. If you just say it's all broken or it's all a security risk, they don't really know what that means. They know it's important, but they don't know how it impacts what they do every day.
So what's tough whenever I hear you talking about this is I put myself in IT director's spot and I'm reporting to Chelsey and I know it's broken And so I bring you in, and you basically now are going to prove the fact that it's super broken. Like, how do you go about doing that and not make me look bad to Chelsey? Right? Like it's scary for me to want to invite you in. And as a consultant, you should, right? Like, and hopefully again, that trust is there. But that's a scary thing for any of us to do. For me in my role at Pearson-Kelly, to have a consultant come in and then go to my boss and tell her all the things that I don't do correctly, that's intimidating. And so how do you navigate that? And Chelsey, for you, I think, I want to circle back in a second to ask you, like, what are your expectations for those types of things as an owner? What are you really looking for in those pieces? So for you, Tyler, how do you navigate that?
And it's a very interesting sort of relationship. So whenever you bring another party in, because it's like, hey, we want to go get a security vendor, or someone, you're like, hey, I'm the IT guy. Like, why do we need this, right? You're already kind of on the defensive foot initially, because you're like, I don't, even though you may see the value, you're like, why are we looking elsewhere, right? Yeah, you do that. So it's about a partnership, right? I mean, it's not you versus them. It's not us versus them. We're working with the IT team or the IT director in this case to say, hey, what are your concerns? Like, what have you seen? We want to help you augment that. It's not that we want to say, look at this is what the IT director's been doing wrong. If that is something that's occurred, then we want to address it with the IT director kind of preemptively. We don't want to go to the leadership team. If maybe they don't know about it, maybe they're not aware that they've been doing something that's incorrect. Let's give them a chance to kind of improve that as well. We can put that as part of our presentation. But it's a partnership with the IT team, and then you'll go and present. And hopefully what we're saying to the leadership team is the same things the IT director have been saying, with maybe some other organizational knowledge, but we're saying the same things. Now, a frustrating point here is when the IT guy has said it like 5 times and the leadership team hasn't reacted, and then a third party comes in, says it once, and they're like, we're sold. And you're like, that's the same thing I just said. I don't understand what did it sound different when he said it? Like, I don't understand, but ultimately you get what you need. So it is beneficial, but it is just different when you kind of hear it from an outside party, because that your internal person has your best interest at heart, and that they're always going to shoot for the top. They're always going to do the best that's for your business, but you kind of get blind to that, where you're like, man, they're always doing that. Like, I know I hired them to do this, it's what I want, but like it's they're always, I don't know that we have to go that overboard every time. So they get a little bit desensitized to that. So when they hear it from an outside person with industry knowledge, it has a different kind of feel to it. And Chelsey can probably talk a little bit more about how it is from that perspective, but it is different. But going into it, it's never us versus them. It's a partnership with the IT team to do that. I've brought in security MSPs in previous roles, and was very hesitant, not super thrilled about it, because I'm a security guy, and I'm like, I don't know what we're doing here, but I guess this is what we're doing. And I was pretty transparent with them. I'm like, look, this is what, I don't think we need you guys. Like, this is what I think that we have going on. And they're like, well, can you do these things? Like, have you been able to do this? What about this? I'm like, well, I don't have the resources for that. And they're like, cool, that's where we fit. That's where we can help you. Like, we don't got to take the whole thing. If you've got this buttoned up, then we'll augment your staff, and we'll augment your team to help you where you don't have the time and resources. And then that became a trusted partnership, and I relied upon that vendor all the time because they were, they might as well have been an extension of my team. Granted, they still did administrative proposals that got more traction than some of the things that I said, which was frustrating a bit, but it did still work, right? We did still get the security initiatives that we needed.
Love that,
That's
Tyler.
good.
That reminds me of one of our technical our technical resources over on the print side of the business. He was in town and trying to settle down our service team, because he's like, I hear it every single time, service technicians out there saying one thing to the client, and they're like, I want to speak to your manager. He's like, manager goes in, says the same exact thing and the same phrasing, the same tone. They're like, yeah, still don't get it. He's like, I show up, I go in, I'm working directly with the manufacturer, I probably say it way worse. And they're like, oh, makes sense. Yeah, let's move forward with that. And so it's just, that's part of the human failures, I guess. But going back to why we developed our programs for managed IT is exactly what you just spoke to, Tyler. I love that you explained it from a different perspective, because when a lot of our, I don't even want to say competitors, but there's a lot of companies that have been selling IT services for years. And they go in with the approach of, hey, you've got a guy, you're paying him $60,000 a year, and he's not even that great. We've talked to him for a bit. We can replace him. Our program's going to cost you $40,000 a year, and you can get rid of him. You don't have to manage him. You don't have the health insurance. It's a rip and replace model. And we didn't like that. We recognized that there was a true pain point, because we've lived some of the pain points, kind of like I alluded to earlier, with needing to outsource some of the CFO through an augmentation just for a small period of time through some turnover. And so it can look a lot of different ways, but there are so many companies out there that either have the challenge of IT not being able to communicate to leadership to get what they need, or they have a short staff. And so they don't necessarily have the resources to do what they need to get done. And so that was what we recognized whenever we tried to build out our offerings and say, we don't want to go replace IT guys. We want to go alongside them and be big brother, make them look better within their own environment. And they help us author what that looks like 9 times out of 10, because they know where they're skilled. And even if they're skilled in 5 categories, but they don't have the resources to address 3 of them, they may be attracted to that. And then they also know how to communicate with us, and then we can help them communicate with their internal leadership team. But we want to have that partnership, and replacing people is not our practice.
So kind of in closing here, I want to hear, what is your biggest fear? So Chelsey, when it comes to security, as an owner of an organization, and let's not pretend like we're an MSP, let's just pretend like you're up and down the street, regular organization, right? Whatever industry, but like, what keeps you up at night whenever you think about cybersecurity, when you think about the security that offerings that Tyler would perform for an organization? Like, what's your biggest, like, whoa, this scares me? And you can't say all of this.
There's a lot.
I know there's a lot. I totally get it. That's a tough question. I know.
Probably the unknown, and then just, are there things that are going down? Because as fast as we can button ourselves up with different layers and different ways to mitigate risk, the hackers are also finding that next new fun way to game the system, So it's like, there's that constant tug of war of things that we don't even know are being developed right now on another way to attack us. And then also the users. I love the analogy of, like, we can have all the measures in place to protect our house with an alarm system, a lock on the door, a fence, Ring camera, guard dog, bat, gun. Like, I don't care. You do all these things to try to keep the bad guys out. But the second my 6-year-old Hudson thinks that the UPS guy is showing up with his new, Game Boy or whatever he plays, he's opening the door and letting the bad guy in. And so none of the measures that I put in place have any impact. Yeah. So then it's all about, okay, how do you identify where the bad guy is, lock him down, and make sure that he does the least amount of damage as possible. And so I think users are one of those things that you're constantly having to coach, train, try everything in your power to mitigate that risk, but you really can't control humans.
Yeah. It feels like a game you can't win, which I really don't like those types of games.
Yes.
So, and I know you're competitive, so I know you feel the same way. Tyler, same question from an IT perspective. A guy whose focus is in security, as an expert, what keeps you up at night? What is it that is that one thing or a couple things that really just...
Yeah, for sure. I mean, users, of course, as Chelsey alluded to, is huge. I mean, like, the technology doesn't matter if your staff don't understand what you're trying to do or have it. So training your team, it's where you start, and it's where you're going to end. It's where you're going to keep going. I mean, it's what you always do. But the things for me outside of that, to kind of take a bit of a different approach, is where it becomes a challenge for someone in my position. You walk into an organization, or you like here or otherwise any business, and you kind of do an assessment. You take stock of where things at, and you see all the risks that exist. And there's always going to be a number of risks. that are out there. So now you have to start fixing those. But for me, let's say it takes 2 years to fix them all. That's 2 years that you're staring down the barrel of this, right, every day, like just hoping that something does. Like you're still trying to get it buttoned up, and you're working as fast as you can. But there's a financial and monetary perspective to it. But like you feel like you're kind of rolling the dice every day and hoping that it doesn't land on the bad side, right? That's kind of the thing that makes it difficult for me, is that like you don't know what you don't know, obviously, but when you know it's out there and you know it still exists and you're trying to fix it, but it just haven't got to it yet, that's extremely nerve-wracking, because you can't just append everything and rip it all out and then fix it all in a weekend or something. Like, I mean, there are some organizations that can do that, but not very many, right? That's a big undertaking. If they had that kind of cash or that amount of flexibility, they probably wouldn't be in a scenario of having a lot to fix all at once, right? So that becomes a challenge. Is how do you prioritize to kind of try to stay ahead, because new security risks come out every day, and that you're not prepared for those because you still got these other ones you're trying to button up over here that you're working hard towards. How do you protect proactively moving forward, as well as trying to shore up what's behind you that you've identified, is a big task, and it's difficult to do, and it can add a lot of anxiety, sleepless nights, if you will, trying to think about, like, man, I hope that doesn't happen, right? Because it stays in your mind constantly until you get it fixed.
So I said that was the last question, but I have one more question. All right. Unlimited budget. Unlimited budget, right? Can anyone guarantee you're perfectly safe, nothing can ever go wrong?
No, absolutely not. I mean, security is a tough game, no matter how much money you got. I mean, if Google and Amazon and some of these guys who have got a tremendous amount of resources still get hit, it's still possible, right? But what you're trying to do is, if you've padlocked every door in your house and you've got all the security mechanisms in your house, does it mean someone can't get into your house? Absolutely not. They can find a way, but it makes it much harder. There's a greater chance they're going to get detected when they're doing it, and they're not going to be successful. But some people look at that and say, well, if I can't stop them guaranteed, then why even bother? But if I leave every door and window open in my house, when there's a potential burglar driving by, right, they're going to be like, do I want to take the house that's got a bunch of padlocks and iron gates and stuff that I could probably get into, or I just walk into that one? Like, that was right there. That's super simple. There's no cameras. The doors are wide open. Like, I mean, maybe it's even abandoned. I don't even know what's going on over there. But so that's kind of the difference, right? Like, the harder it is for someone to get into your network and to get those things and penetrate your defenses and get your data, the less likely you are to be a target. It doesn't mean that you're absolutely off the table. If somebody is really targeting you, then that is a piece where a lot of those layers of security help you. Maybe you don't stop them from getting in, but you detect them and you keep them from getting the data. Like, they still got in, but they get caught, or they can't get access to certain parts of your network, but even though they got into a certain spot. There are tons of ways to limit what the exposure is, rather than just saying, like, we're not going to give it an attempt, which I've seen that approach sometimes, where people get frustrated because they're like, we spent how much money and it still happened? Like, that's crazy. But again, coming back to user training and the tools, like, it's a combination of things. But I can guarantee you, if you're the person that leaves all your doors and windows open every day, your probability of getting robbed goes up quite a bit, right? Compared to the person who doesn't.
I think
Tyler,
that's really
talking. Oh, sorry.
No, I think that's really good to hear, because a lot of people do, I think, kind of give up too early on it. And I would be interested, but, like, Chelsey, is it surprising that there's going to be risk as an owner? Like,
No, but I think that comes in the way of education. You have to put it into maybe an analogy that makes sense to you, because business is always a risk. Everyone's like, COVID, was a terrible year, and business changed, or it was unprecedented times, and it's like, business is a risk, period. COVID or no COVID, it just is. And so it's kind of asinine for me to think that security would ever not be that way. But I do think so many times people want to say, I want a guarantee, and it's just not a real thing. I want to know, what do you think that the Midwest pulse is on security? Like, how serious do you think people understand it? How serious do they take it?
compared to the coasts on either side, where you've got larger tech sectors, not quite as well. Especially like central, Midwest, kind of where we're at, it's a bit difficult. One, IT salaries and skill sets are not quite as are not compensated as well, so it's hard to get talent. The talent that is really good usually gravitates to one of those larger sections of the country. It's improving. We've got some big tech sectors or some growing tech sectors kind of in the Midwest, but for the most part, we still have an older kind of old school approach to things like IT. There's just the one IT guy, just hire the IT guy and he does the IT stuff, right? Whereas if you look at some of the larger industries and kind of metro areas, you'll see that a lot of businesses have said, yeah, we got to have a security team, we need to have security engineers, we need to have a network guy. They've understood through other businesses and practices that it has to scale and grow like that. But we're a bit behind there. That's not to say that we're never going to catch up, but we kind of have a unique approach to it that's a bit more mom and pop, if you will, kind of in some areas. But we're heavily rural, so that kind of happens. Like, I mean, even in our specific area, it's a little bit better. But imagine going out to a very rural area. Like their IT guy probably isn't gonna, not gonna have the same ring to it out there, right? That's gonna be the guy that also fixes your car or something. Like it's a unique kind of design there. But it's the reason why you see in the industry across the board a heavy push to get more people involved in tech and in security to get it promoted more in like schools and otherwise to try to, because technology is not going away and we need more staff. There's always a skills shortage in almost every kind of area. But places like MSPs and larger firms across the country, that's what their specialty is helping augment those businesses that either can't afford the staff or it doesn't scale for them or just don't have the resources to acquire technical talent, and they're just they hire it out, and it makes sense. But they have to first see the value and why they need some technology staff to assist. But
well, you guys are awesome. Thank you both so much for being here. I loved having this conversation, and I am thoroughly looking forward to doing it again. So thanks to both of you, and look forward to the next one.